Welcome back to the Well-Rounded Living channel. I am JJ, and today we're here to talk about, can you get rich with rentals? Recently, I've been doing a lot of videos about retirement and trying to get there, and owning, renting, and then reselling rentals is one of the ways that I have tried to plan for retirement. I'm trying to supplement what I can do in my 401ks and IRAs. And at this point in time, I don't have any rentals, but I have a lot of experience with them and I want to talk through it. So today's video is about, can you get rich with rentals? The short answer is yes. The long answer is maybe. It depends on a lot of factors. Yes, it's possible, but it's not guaranteed. And it is also very possible that you'll lose money in doing this. So let's talk for a minute about how you would get into the rental market. How might you obtain a rental if you don't have one now? Well, there's two primary ways. The first one is by far the easiest. That would be, you own a house, you live in it, you move and buy another house, and you rent out the old one. That's the easiest way to do it, and for good reason. The reason is, if you are going to look for a loan on a house, it is much more difficult and much more expensive to get an investment loan. So if you were to say to a bank, I want to buy a property that I am going to rent out. It's going to be a rental, it's an investment, it's a business, it's a different category of loan. If you instead go and say, I want to buy a house for me, that's the easiest possible loan to get, in my opinion. But you can go and say, I'm looking for another home. I'm going to sell my previous home. I want to buy the new home. So they're going to give you a really good rate. You then go buy that new home, but your old loan on your old house is still under those same assumptions of, you still were buying it to live in it. You're not buying it as an investment. So you still get the low rate and the low criteria to get in that you had on that old loan. So let's talk about the differences there. If you're going to get a business loan on a rental property, number one, you have to qualify for both loans at the same time. Number two, you have to come up with typically a 25% down payment. Now, if you're just buying a house for yourself, a lot of the time you can find something lower than that. You may have to pay PMI if it's below 20%, but it's still possible. On a business loan, it's not. 25% down. So if you have a $200,000 house that you're buying as a rental, that 25% down means $50,000 out of pocket. So obviously it's way easier to take a house you're living in, buy another one to live in, and then rent out the old one. But if you don't want to do that, you can go and get one of these business loans with 25% down in order to purchase a rental outright and rent it from there and start your business. Now, before you do this, before you run and say, yay, I know how to go get a rental, I'm going to do it, you have to run some numbers. You really have to be sure that this is going to make you money. So you start by getting a real estate agent, or at least going to some place like realtor.com. But what you're looking for here is comps, comparables in the area that compare to what you're buying. So other rentals, let's say it's a house, for example. Let's say it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single family home. And you are wanting to know, okay, can I make money on this? Well, you have to start by saying, what do other 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single family homes in the area rent for? Once you have that number, then you can compare that to, what do single family 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes cost if you want to buy it? So now you know, this is the amount of money you might realistically be able to make, because that's what other people in the area are making on theirs. This is what you might be able to buy those properties for. You can start an initial comparison right there. Is that rent high enough to pay for the mortgage on the property at that price? If not, it's not a good idea. But let's go into a little more detail on what would actually make this a viable investment. With rentals, there are typically 3 ways that you're going to make money: cash flow, appreciation, and depreciation. We'll go into all of these here in a second, but understanding that those are the 3 methods is important going in. So the first step of checking out how much rent could you make and comparing it to the mortgage to determine whether or not that's actually something that's making any money, or if you're just in the hole right off the bat, that rent really needs to be a lot higher than that mortgage payment. And the reason is because there are other expenses you're going to need to take into consideration. The first expense is going to be vacancy. When you're thinking about having a property that people are going to move into, it's not going to have somebody in it all of the time. People are going to move in, they're going to move out. And it could be that they move out on one day of the month and somebody doesn't want to move in for another month or for 3 weeks or something like that. The next beginning tenant is going to be after the existing tenant moves out. And you don't know how much time that's going to be. You have to account for some vacancy. Now, I've heard this go several different ways. I've heard people say you should always leave a house vacant for a month while you fix it up and clean it and not even list it for that first month. Well, that's a lot of money lost. I actually put into all of my contracts that my tenants had to let me list the house for lease again while they were in it. For their last 30 days, they had to allow me to put it on the market. That way, after they moved out, I either had to do a mad dash to clean everything and get it ready for the next tenants the day they moved out, or at least people were looking and I had the possibility of finding a tenant even if they were going to rent it 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, something like that. Regardless, vacancy will happen, especially if you have a tenant that leaves in something like September. School's already started, nobody's looking, everyone who was going to move already did, and you could end up with multiple months of vacancy. I have had 3 months of vacancy before, and that is miserable. So let's talk about why that's such a problem. Let's say, for easy math, you have a rental property that is $2,000 a month. You're asking $2,000 a month for people to rent it, and nobody does. 1 month of vacancy is going to cost you $2,000. You did not get that $2,000. Well, let's say instead, in order to beat out competition in the area, you lowered that from $2,000 to $1,900. You are losing $100 a month off of that rent that you think you could have obtained. But over the course of a year, that is $1,200. Which is better? Which is cheaper for you? To lose the $1,200 and get a tenant quicker? Or to lose the $2,000 because you were adamant that you needed to make that amount of money and then have a month of vacancy? The vacancy was more expensive. Now, there's a lot more that goes into vacancy than that. So let's think about this. Obviously, you have the lost rent, right? But what was that lost rent going towards? You've got the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance that you're going to have to pay. You've also got to pay for utility bills. And when you have a utility bill, it's not just, oh, I got to pay $50 that month for electricity. No, you typically have to pay to get the utilities transferred into your name, and there's a fee for that. I've seen that fee be as high as $75 for hooking up the gas, something like that, because it requires somebody to actually come out, turn off the gas or turn on the gas, things like that. But they have fees for switching things over into your name. So you have to pay those fees a lot of the time every single time this gets transferred into your name. Then you have to pay the cost of those utilities for that month. In addition to that, who's going to be mowing the lawn? If it is a house and it is in spring, for example, you can't just say, oh, that's going to be vacant for a month, I'll just let the grass grow. Well, who's going to want to rent that property? Nobody. They're going to say, it looks horrible. Somebody needs to come in here and clean it up. So you have to then go mow. Also, you have the added possibility of something bad happening to the house and nobody living there, so nobody knows. I'll give you a little story. I had a rental property where somebody moved out and I happened to go over there one day to take a contractor to look at fixing something before the next tenant moved in. And I just happened to be there at the right time because the air conditioning drain line had clogged and all of the condensation from the air conditioning had accumulated in the pan below the air conditioning unit and was spilling over. Well, it just so happens this was a second story. It was one of those really vaulted ceilings. The air conditioning was above the second story ceiling, and it was leaking through that, coming down and landing on hardwood floor. So if I hadn't caught it right at that time, that could have been an unbelievable expense. But I did catch it right away. I was able to dry up all the water. I was able to pull out all the drywall. I was able to spray in some anti-mold and mildew spray, remove all the insulation, replace it all, do everything and get it cleaned up. But what if I hadn't shown up that day? What if I hadn't gone back for 2 days, 3 days, a week? What do you think that house would have looked like? That could have been very, very expensive. That's the potential cost of vacancy. All right, let's talk about some other expenses that you'll need to include in your plan here. So you've got vacancy down. You've got that baked into, is this going to be profitable? There are other things that come up. Appliances breaking down. You could have an air conditioning line that gets clogged, which I had to call out a plumber for. You could have a backup in a sink. I've seen that often in a master bedroom sink where they have hair or things down the drain in the sink and it starts to back up and create a clog and something that somebody has to come deal with. I have had to replace so many garbage disposals. I don't know why these things go out so frequently, but they do. So if you're handy, you can do it yourself and it will save a lot of money. If you're not, this could cost you $600 via a plumber because they always want to use the top of the line garbage disposal that for some reason is like $500 or $600, and you can go get one at Lowe's for $100. But still, that's a cost you have to take into consideration. Whenever somebody moves out, you're going to need to relist it. I always used a realtor, so there are going to be realty fees. Typically, it was something like 1 month's rent that you have to pay to the realtor whenever they relist it. Totally worth it because they can find somebody for you quick, but it's another fee. And then beyond having to repair things that break and having to pay to relist it and having to have these vacancies, you're going to have maintenance items. You will have to go and replace the air conditioning filters because eventually if you don't replace those filters, the fan blower motors will just die on you. But you'll have that, you'll have painting, you'll have fixing scuffs on the floor, you'll have cleaning between tenants, dusting, carpet replacement potentially, appliance replacement. All of these things have happened to me. I've had to do every single one of them. Now, they don't happen every single year, and this is where it gets a little tricky. When you have no idea what this might cost you, you have to assume something, right? You know eventually something's going to happen, and you're going to average that out over the course of years, but you have to come up with an average. So I would start with a minimum of $100 a month. Now, that might seem like a lot to you. It might seem like not enough. To me, that seems like nowhere near enough. I have had my budget as high as $500 a month for expenses, vacancy, repair, and it wasn't enough. Think about that for a second. $500 a month, $6,000 a year wasn't enough to pay for the vacancy, expenses, and repairs I had on some of these properties. This is where you get into the, are you really going to get rich with rentals? No, there is a very good possibility that some of these things could add up and you could lose money. I will say I have never fully lost money on a rental. I have always made money. But I did have one property that I regret buying. If I had just taken all the money for that and put it into the stock market, I would have made more than I did on the rental, and the rental took me time and effort. But you don't know that going in, so there is some risk here. I want you to be well informed, and I will say, of my rental career, I have made money, and I've made a decent amount of money. It's worth doing, just know the risks going in. Okay, now that you've made this ridiculous list of expenses that you think are way higher than are ever going to happen, take that rent you think you can make, subtract the expenses, the mortgage, taxes, and insurance from it. That gives you your potential profit from the cash flow perspective. Next, let's go into appreciation. Houses go up over time in value. Of course, recently, house values have gone through the roof. I live in Texas, and they have gone up, 30%. It seems ridiculous to me. But it's great because you make money while you own houses during this time frame. But that doesn't always happen. My very first rental I bought was in the middle of the Great Recession, the housing crisis back in 2008. And I just happened to have some money at that point in time. I was putting enough into my 401ks and I wanted to do something with it. So I thought, hey, let's try rentals. So I happened to get a house really, really cheap. Well, that house had gone down in value since it was built just a few years prior. It had gone down by like $40,000 or $50,000. Well, if you owned a property that went down in value by $40,000 or $50,000, that would be pretty miserable if you had to sell. Now, in tandem with that, you have to take into consideration rents. Rents do not always go up. So when that property went down in value by $50,000, it could very well also have lost value in rent. And the reason for that was because of what was happening in 2008. A lot of people were losing their jobs, they had bad credit, they couldn't qualify for rent, they were moving in with relatives, things like that. So at that point in time, both home values and rents went down. Well, if you had bought that house that house I bought for $163,000, and it should have been worth $200,000 to $210,000. So let's say I had bought it for $200,000 to $210,000, and I was expecting to get $2,300 a month in rent, something like that, $2,500 a month in rent. When I bought that house, I was only able to get $1,700 a month in rent for it. So it just gives you an idea of Rents change, home prices change. Neither of these always go up. So you have to take that into consideration. Appreciation over time should happen, but it's not guaranteed. I will add with that rents do not follow the value of the house. So, for example, appreciation could very well be happening because the market's hot, people are buying like crazy, interest rates are low. It's exactly what we've seen recently. However, because everyone can buy, no one wants to rent. So the value of the house has gone through the roof, but the rent has gone down. Well, what happens when that occurs? What happens is you have to pay more in taxes every year because the county is going to say, hey, your house is valued at twice what it was valued 5 years ago, so you've got to pay taxes on that. And yet your tenants are going to say, I'm not going to pay more in rent to cover that. They want to pay the exact same rent they've been paying at other houses in the area. So the rent may very well stay the same while it costs you more because the taxable value went up. Now, in your area, this might not be as much of an issue. In Texas, we do not have a state income tax, and the way they get their money is via property taxes. So when the property taxes go up and your rent doesn't, you feel it. Last, let's talk about depreciation. Now, this one I really don't like because this is really kind of a bait and switch. People talk about depreciation being a way to make money, but it's not. It's a way to postpone taxes. So when you make your rent and you get to take away all of your expenses from it, the government says everything left is profit. Okay, well, if you think about your expenses, paying your mortgage is not an expense. Paying down the principal is actually you just paying off your house. So if you really start to take into consideration the amount of rent you're getting, minus the expenses, but not minus the mortgage payment, you can subtract the taxes, you can subtract the insurance, and you can subtract the interest on the loan. But that principal payment is taken out, and the government treats that as profit. So now you're saying to the government, well, the house is losing value. They will allow you to depreciate it, assuming that the house will be trashed and worth nothing in 27 and a half years. So you take what you paid for the house, divide it by 27 and a half, and you can take that amount as depreciation every year. That has the benefit of offsetting this income you're making. So many years you can say, well, look, I made no money. You really did, you know you did, and eventually you're going to have to pay for it. But for that year, you get to say, I made no money. Here's where you get caught in a trap there. When you sell that property, you take the value you sold it for minus the value you bought it for. Then you add back in all the depreciation you took out. And that's what you now have to pay taxes on, capital gains tax, at the other end. Now, there is a benefit here. The benefit is if you're paying taxes every year on something, you're paying standard income tax. Those rates can be high. If you're paying it at the end, you're paying capital gains tax rates. Capital gains tax rates typically are lower. However, let's talk about that for a second. We're talking about selling a house. A house is a very expensive item. So when you're paying capital gains, there are certain brackets. Right now in 2021, if you make $80,000 or less for the entire year in all forms of income, including your capital gains, you will pay zero tax on the capital gain portion. If you make up to $250,000, you will pay 15%. So that still sounds pretty good depending upon what tax bracket you fall into. However, over $250,000, they add in an additional 3.9% Medicare surtax, which most people don't talk about because they just think about the 15% and the 20% bracket. But there is another one that kicks in at $250,000. Now that is including your income, your spouse's income, your rental income, and the sale of the property. If all of that together goes over $250,000, even if your capital gain was only $20,000, you're going to have to pay that extra 3.9% on top of the 15%. And then, of course, up much higher is the 20% capital gains tax rate. So it is possible that you could be paying a very high tax rate in capital gains if you happen to make a bunch of money. But what you're doing with depreciation is just pushing that off to a later date. Okay, now that you know how you make money, the cash flow, the appreciation, you're excluding the depreciation from that in your mind, knowing that you will have to pay it later. You've got the possible rent, you've got all of your expenses and your mortgage and maintenance and vacancy and everything you can think of. If you are still making money that is a good rental to buy. It is an investment. It is going to make you money. Eventually, it will appreciate. And if you play your cards right, you could make a bunch of money on that property. But now you can go into this equipped with the knowledge you need to have a successful investment and not just jump on something because you've heard rentals are great. I do want to leave you with a few items that I learned from experience that I think are worth noting. Number one is rentals will frustrate you. You will get calls in the middle of the night. Something's broken. In the middle of summer, the air conditioning might break. When you are sick, the garbage disposal might break, and you can't go deal with it because you're sick. I have had that happen. Anytime I am wanting to go on vacation, I'm coming back from vacation, I'm feeling under the weather, that always seemed to be when the tenants would call to ask me to fix something. Vacancy, I went over before, but it is something to keep in mind. If it's going to be vacant, you are going to need to go and check on that house regularly, which can go back into the frustrations category I was talking about. And lastly, the eviction moratorium that happened just recently. Well, there were articles all over the place about people saying, I'm just not paying my rent because the government says I don't have to. Even if they didn't qualify for that COVID-related eviction moratorium. It is possible that government rules put in place could affect you in some way that you have no control over. Or, even without that, you could have people that just don't pay their rent. Now, thankfully, I never had that happen. Eventually, everyone paid their rent. However, I did have people damage houses and they did not want to pay for it. I did have people that I had to follow up on because they weren't paying their rent on time. There were issues. Those also go back into the frustrations category. So keep these in mind going in. Eventually, I think many people like me get frustrated and don't want anything to do with the rental market anymore. However, I did make good money on those when I had them. The period of time that I bought in a down market in the Great Recession, and I continued over a period of time, owned rentals for about 12 years and then got out. It was definitely a good investment. It was a good idea, but I did my time, I'm done, and I want to move on. So knowing that, if you are just starting out, it is a great investment. You really can make a lot of money. It is possible, but be smart about it. Be prepared. Know what to expect, and you will succeed. That is all I have today. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you like this video, please click on the like button below or subscribe if you'd like to see more of my videos and click the bell icon if you'd like to get notified when I post more. I'll see you next time.